Hello, my name is Gary Davis, and today we're going to be taking a look at the first in a two-part webinar series on the Autodesk Entertainment Creation Suite. Today, myself and I'll be joined with my colleague Lee Fraser will be presenting the first half, and this is, again, it's a two-part series that we're going to be presenting, and today's session of part one is actually itself in two parts. The first half, I'm going to be presenting 3ds Max 2013 new features with relation to a couple of things, including some exciting new interop with Adobe products, as well as our other suite products like Motion Builder. And then in the second half of the presentation, Lee is going to be taking a look at the new Maya 2013 release and some other interop features, as well as new features within the point product itself. So with that, we'll get started, and I'll be starting off the first half of today's session with 3ds Max 2013 new feature highlights. We're not going to have time to cover everything in this video, so I am just going to verbally go over some feature highlights here before we get into the actual application. The first feature I'm going to be showing actually today is in this video is state sets, which is not only a render pass system, and that's getting a lot of attention, but I also want to point out that this state sets feature is a scene management system. So for people that might be doing game development and not rendering, this is not a feature that you should overlook. It is useful for everybody using 3ds Max, not just for render pass management. We're also going to be taking a look at a feature called Media Sync, which is you could consider a subset feature of state sets. And this is how we have an interop directly with Adobe Photoshop and Adobe After Effects. And Media Sync with After Effects is kind of interesting because it's a bidirectional link. And what I mean by that, and you'll see this later in the video, is that when we make changes in either 3ds Max or After Effects, we can push those changes to the other application. Now, both After Effects and Photoshop can take advantage of a feature called the Slate Compositing Editor, which is also part of state sets. So all of these features are sort of subsets of state sets, but they're not the only way of using state sets. The Slate Compositing Editor is where you can see your layers sort of in a pre-comp workflow before you go out to either After Effects or Photoshop. iRay has been in Max for a couple of releases now, and we're continuing development around it. Now in the 2013 release of 3ds Max, you have the ability to use iRay and Active Shade together. And this also has a really nice option if you have multiple graphics cards or GPUs that are CUDA enabled. You can actually set one of them to be your viewports and others to actually control the Active Shade interactive rendering, which is pretty cool, and I'll be showing that later. Nitrous and Quicksilver have a number of advancements, and those include image-based lighting, depth of field, particle flow speed up, as well as a clay shader, and there's a new large scene optimization for shadows directly in the viewport or on your GPU Quicksilver renders. Mass Effects is our physics engine, and we continue to do development around that. The 2013 release adds features around cloth and also ragdolls, as well as some new constraints. Tab layouts and customized workspaces are a way for you to organize your actual Max environment as you work. And these actually work hand in hand really nicely with the state sets feature mentioned earlier. Track View has now animation retiming in it so that you can do a local or a global animation curve retiming on your animation curves. More animation interop actually that's kind of exciting is that the 3ds Max CAT system, or Character Animation Toolkit, can now actually export or work in tandem with Human IK, and that can be done in either Maya or Motion Builder. And it's not just an export, it's actually using our one-click interop that we've introduced a couple of releases back, but for the first time in the Ultimate Suite of the Autodesk Entertainment Creation Suite Ultimate Edition 2013, that's a mouthful. For the first time, Max and Maya are now available in one product. So we have the 2013 features going back and forth between 3ds Max and Maya, as well as Motion Builder. Along those same lines, we now offer a Maya navigation option inside of 3ds Max. So for people that might want to have a Maya pipeline but want to take advantage of the CAT Character Animation Toolkit inside of Max, you can now go back and forth between the applications a lot easier using familiar hotkeys and navigation style inside of 3ds Max. The animation store is also another exciting feature inside of 3ds Max, and this is useful for seasoned veterans as well as part-time or just people that might not have all the time in the world to be doing hand animation or might not be able to afford a motion capture system. This is a way that you can actually get online and buy animation at a very affordable pricing structure. And another animation feature to mention is a feature called G-Poly, which is the first phase of a multi-year initiative, part of the Excalibur initiative, around improving performance directly in the viewport. And this is a new mesh type. We're also going to mention here briefly a focus on workflows, or SATs as we call them. SAT stands for Small Annoying Things, and this actually is a forum that we have called the User Voice. And this is a URL just to mention, this autodesk.uservoice.com. And I'm not going to go through all of these right here, but you can just see that in the 2013 release of 3ds Max, the Small Annoying Things list is quite long, and there's actually over 40 or 50 of these, and I just wanted to point out a couple of these on screen. But really the point is that URL on the left side of the screen right now, and you can go and vote on what features that you want revisited or added into 3ds Max, and the developers are definitely listening very carefully to this forum. So with that, I'm going to close out the PowerPoint and get started with our look at new feature highlights of 3ds Max 2013. Before I get started in 3ds Max, I'd like to thank the guys over at the Band Together game. This is a new game that's going to be available for the iPad, and specifically John Chalfant was kind enough to give us these assets. You can see the trailer up online here if you want at bandtogethergame.com. And what I'm going to do now is jump inside of 3ds Max 2013 and show you a couple of the new feature highlights around the tabbed layouts just to get things started. So here you can see we've got an animation set up, and I've got viewports kind of common layout here with one on the side. This is our top view, and you can see I'm zooming in and out here. But over here on the left side, we have a couple of different ways to do views. And you can see here if I go to this quad view, it's actually a single viewport for looking at things full screen. And if I just click this button, I can go back to the previous viewport layout. So as opposed to switching these manually and only really having one layout at a time, you could still do that where you configure your viewport layout like this. But it's much easier to just come through here and do this drop down where I can have a flyout. And let's say, for example, I wanted to set up an animation layout. What I could do is have this bottom view here, and I have a nice wide viewport, and I could just say, let's, instead of having this be a left, let's go to extended view and maybe have a new track view here, and have this one, I'm just tapping the C key to be our camera. And then in this view here, maybe we want to use a new viewport layout, or sorry, shading mode called clay, and that's going to be useful specifically for modelers especially. But here's just a layout that we could set up for animation, and then what I could optionally do is right click on this and then save this as a preset for animation. So these viewport layout tabs are actually saved within the Max file itself, but if you use these, the ability to save these, you can actually come back and say save this configuration as a preset. And now when I come through into a new Max scene, I could come in and say, let's use that animation preset. So you can set up as many of these as you want. And let's say I have this tall one, for example, that's going to be maybe just a perspective view. And I'll just use my hotkeys to kind of set up a perspective view. That's going to be in shaded mode, like that. And then over here, maybe we want to have our extended viewports of our Scene Explorer so that we can see a nice object list of everything in our scene. And remember that the Scene Explorer as well, you can right click and set up lots of different columns here. So I could have several different Scene Explorers for doing things, handling like lighting or animation or hiding things or all kinds of different stuff. And then once I set these viewports up the way that I like, now I can very quickly get between these different viewport layouts. So it's a really handy feature, and these also work very well with the feature that I'm about to show you now called state sets. So this is how these features can be used if you're not a renderer, but I'm going to focus on the rendering pass management system in this scene. What we've got over here, and I'm just going to scrub out to a frame, let's get to frame maybe 200 on this thing, on this scene here. What I'm first going to do is show you a problem and then a solution and how state sets can fix that. If I take a look at our rendering, we've already set up render elements ahead of time, and this scene is set up using the scanline renderer, and it's very basic setup of diffuse. We have a matte that's going to be outputting a matte, black and white matte for our characters' bodies. We have object ID, self-illumination, z-depth, as well as a specular pass. And as soon as my machine is done auto-saving here, I'll actually go ahead and hit the render button. And what we're going to first do is render this out with our render elements, and you'll see the problem, and then we're going to show you the solution. So once again, I'm using the scanline renderer. It's going to knock this thing out very quickly because we're not doing any global illumination or anything like that. And then we're going to see our render passes kind of pop up, and there's our specular pass. No problem with the specular pass. That one's looking pretty good. Here's a problem here with our diffuse. You can see up here, right up in here, our candle flame that we have right here is actually the old school trick where you just put a texture map on a card. And that card is showing in the Z-depth pass, which we will not want to do. So that's going to be where we have to start separating things out and rendering objects differently, or maybe with different materials and so on. So, this Z-depth pass of a card is a classic issue that you'd want to solve with different renders or different render passes. Here's another kind of similar. This is our self-illumination pass, and we have our candle flame and our eyeballs that are together. If we wanted to separate those out in post, we might want to do that as a separate pass. This is an object ID pass. There's not really any problem with this. I'm just kind of pointing it out. And then here's a matte pass. We may or may not want to have that candle. So it seems like that candle flame is something that we want to really isolate and kind of work with on itself. So now let's take a look at how state sets can solve the problems that we just identified. State sets can be found under the rendering tab, and if I just go ahead and evoke this dialog, what you're going to get here is a blank state. Now the way these work is that you record changes to what's called the base state, or you could think of your max scene as the base state. In this first pass right here, what I'm going to do is hit this button right here, and it turns into a record mode. And what I'm just going to do is quite simply hide this candle flame. So if I just select the candle and go ahead and hide that from our view, that's the only real change that I want recorded in this state. And I'm going to go ahead and turn that off, and actually maybe just rename this state main, or our beauty pass. Now I'm going to click this button here and just create another state. And in this particular state, while I'm recording, what I'm going to do is actually, and you can see that our candle is back. What I'm going to do is select the candle and then get a little tricky here and say everything else in my scene, which I'll say select by invert, everything else in my scene except the candle is going to have a matte shadow material on this one. And in this particular file, or in this particular state set rather, I do not want to do any render elements, so I'm going to turn that off. And all these changes are being recorded into that state. So if I turn that off, you can see I go out of that state, which this is the active state right here. If I turn that off, I go back to our base state, which you can see is using the scanline renderer, and our candle and everything is visible in the scene. And then for our last state, oops, and let me rename that before I move on here. This is just fire. And then our last state, what I'm going to do is create one more state set, and this is going to be QSAO, which stands for quicksilver ambient occlusion. And again, I'm going to get a little tricky here, but I'm going to show you one of my most favorite features about state sets is that you can actually switch renderers. So while I'm recording here, I'm going to say, let's assign a different rendering engine called Quicksilver, and this is our hardware GPU renderer. And what I'm going to do is actually say, let's just change this down for time's sake to be a really quick 128 passes. I only want to do ambient occlusion, and let's turn off reflections and depth of field and so on. Now let's select our candle and go ahead and hide that in our scene. And everything that's left, I'm going to apply a pure white old school standard shader that's 100% self-illuminated. So even while I'm recording here, I'm just going to make sure, oops, and one more thing is I'm going to turn off render elements. So even while I'm recording here, I can actually go through here and do a test render, and let's see how that looks. So what's happening right now is it's compiling the shaders on our video card, and you can see we're getting a nice GPU accelerated ambient occlusion pass that's done very quickly using the NVIDIA hardware that's inside of this box workstation. So that's looking pretty good right there. We go. There's our ambient occlusion pass, and I like the way that that's set up, so I can actually turn that off and then get back out to what's called our base state. Oops, and I have one more thing to do is just turn off that active state that we have. And now you can see that we're back to our base state because none of these are enabled, none of these green arrows, and I'm not recording any state. So to just spot check these, what I'm going to do is actually look at the render elements and go into our main state by just enabling it. So I'm not recording anymore. I'm just kind of checking and seeing that our render elements are active for our beauty pass. For our fire pass, we've got our matte shadow set up. It's just going to be fire, and we're not going to do render elements. And then our quicksilver is actually switching out to the quicksilver renderer and doing our ambient occlusion pass. So we're all good to go there. And now what I can do is say I want to browse to an output directory, and I'm just going to go to our Fusion Drive frames directory, and let's make this one called state sets, or just SS for short, and say OK. And then what we're going to do is give this another output and just call it output.tga. So when I set this path, what that's going to do is actually set that for all of these different states. And then I can very simply right click and say render selected states, or in this case I'll say render all states. And now what you're going to do is see 3ds Max go through these one at a time. And in this case I'm only rendering one frame because of time's sake. but you're going to see that it is actually switching renderers, it's switching shaders. So a lot of action is going on right now. And to highlight some of this stuff as it's going on, there's our candle flame, by the way. And now we're back to the scanline renderer doing the beauty pass. So this is all happening very quickly due to the speed of these renderers and this particular scene. But what we've got out is all those different passes going to all those different frames and render elements. Now you can see that there's no problem with our Z-depth pass of the beauty and so on. So let's just get rid of all those render elements. And then what we can also do is actually evoke in the compositor is to say we want to bring up the composite view of render elements. And this is where you could actually see sort of a pre-comp, if you will, where you have all of your different render passes coming out, and these are the different states. So we have 1, 2, 3 states over here on the left, and on the right in our composite view, you can see those. And actually, if I just maximize our view a little bit, and I'm just using the mouse wheel to kind of scroll in and pan on this, you can also see that we have the ability to actually output different pre-comps, and I'm just actually looking for my ambient occlusion pass. And what we could do is actually get in and show you that each of these has different transfer modes and also opacities so that you can set this up for something like After Effects. So this view on the right here is just a way to sort of pre-visualize how things are going to get composited in your final output. So that's a way to set up state sets, and this can be useful for any different compositor. In a moment, we're going to be taking a look at how to use this with Adobe Photoshop, as well as some interesting interop with After Effects. Another use of the composite view is if you actually render out a still using render elements, and then I can optionally say that I want to create a PSD file, as you can see right here. Now if I hop over into Photoshop, what you can do is you can see that I've got my asset rendered out, and all of these layers come over intact from 3ds Max's media sync. So you can see here I've got my ambient occlusion up on top, and what I could optionally do to just show you a workflow here is let's just create a, not a new layer, but let's just create a group here. And I'm going to just take all these layers and actually group those in together. Now what I could do is say, let's say for example I wanted this layer, which is our main beauty pass, and I wanted to use a matte pass to do a selection on that. Well, I could do things like in Photoshop like a hue shift or a saturation, and I can really just kind of dial that around, and you can see that the color of the characters color of the character's coat is changing there. And what I can do is kind of eyeball that and just get that to be, you know, whatever I want. But that's a non-destructive adjustment layer, and that's part of this group. So what I can do is go over to this layer here, or actually a different image, and let's tile these vertically so I can see both of these at the same time. And then what I could do in this image is just take that group and just drop that over, and now I'm finished with this version. And so we've got our group here, and I can place that however I want, just like I would in any other Photoshop layer. It's a non-destructive workflow. However, I can get back into that adjustment and really just fine-tune and say we want to maybe match that orange hue of the actual background there, so we can dial that in and work non-destructively. So not only is this useful for animators, but the media sync workflow is definitely a dynamic way of working between 3ds Max and Adobe Photoshop. In this scene here, we have a very simple camera move on an iPad, but before I show you the media sync with After Effects, I wanted to very quickly show you a couple of grab bag little features here. If I pop over into our Google Warehouse here, this is just a website if you're not familiar with it. Google Warehouse is a ton of free models, and these are in the SketchUp file format, and I just actually got this iPad and directly just downloaded it and drag and dropped it into 3ds Max, and it created all the shaders for me as Mental Ray Arch and Design. In this case, I'm going to be using the Quicksilver renderer, but I just wanted to point out that there's a ton of models available. And if I go into import models here, you can actually also see that some new features in this release that we have linking not only to AutoCAD as we have in the past, but we have file linking to FBX as well as Autodesk Revit, which is maybe more for the architectural crowd. But it just shows you that there's a lot of different file formats that we can import, as well as, let me just resize this dialog here. And actually on that note, I will mention, not only can we import more file formats than ever before, including the Google SketchUp that I just started mentioning, but another little feature here is that these floating dialogs will actually remember their position and size. So if I were to make this sort of odd horizontal shaped dialog and put it over here and close it and then said file import, it's going to remember where that is. So that's another new feature, is that even just dragging around elements of the interface is much faster in this release of 2013. So back to the action of our media sync with After Effects. Here you can see we have our iPad set up, and I'm only rendering this out with one render pass. What I'm going to do is actually browse out to our frames directory here and render this out live. So I'm going to say frames and go ahead and set that path, and then just right click and say render all states. So we're gonna draw out 60 frames right here. This is actually hardware accelerated using Quicksilver, so it's a very quick render. And then what we're going to do is get those frames and jump over into Adobe After Effects. So what you first want to do is say File, Open Composite Link using the Autodesk Media Sync plugin, and that's been added ahead of time. And then what I can do is optionally import cameras, lights, solids, which is a 3ds Max plane, or in After Effects speak, that's known as a solid or a card, null helper objects, or footage. What I'm going to do is go ahead and say, whoops, and I forgot one more step back inside of 3ds Max, my bad. Let's go back into Max and say I want to actually create that link. So let's say create a compositor link, and what do I want to create with this link? So I'll call this demo, and I'm putting that out on the root of my E drive. And what this is you could consider this a sidecar file. So back in After Effects, what I can do is say create the link to that file called demo, and that's going to make an actual After Effects comp. And if you see this, I can play that down, and you can see that we actually have our footage loaded in. Well, not only did this bring in our footage, but you can see we have our lights in position of 3D space, and we also have all of our layers identified, or not just layers, but items that are brought in via Media Sync are identified here with our compositor link. And you can also see that if I move this layer up to the top, that we have our plane object that we brought in. So for our green screen, or what we're going to put onto the iPad is very visible right there. What we could also do to show this bidirectional link that I mentioned is I'm actually just going to select all the position keys on this green card and delete them. And then what I'm going to do in After Effects is actually get on a frame where I might want to say, to the 3D artist or the 3ds Max artist, I actually want this card to end up over here so that we have room for text on the right side of our screen. So all I've done is offset that in 3D space. But what you can do now, and this is the exciting part, is to say update that link back on the hard drive. And if I go back over into 3ds Max now, what I can do is say update from the link. And before I do that, I'm going to just point out this green card is in its old position. When I click the magic button here, update from link, it's actually going to change that position based on the After Effects artist's workflow. And now what I could do is just say, let's compensate for that change, and maybe move our iPad over here. And then ultimately we want to re-render that out. So now if I say render that out, the frames are going to match up, and I could continue to work in After Effects with that iPad resulting where I actually want it. And then again, if I jump over into After Effects and said, let's replace that footage with our iPad, and that's a target sequence. Now you can see that it's in the right place, and we've had our bidirectional link help us position that in the correct and proper space. So that's Media Sync tying bidirectionally 3ds Max 2013 with After Effects CS4 and later. In this example of an iRay rendering, I've actually made it intentionally too bright, and obviously if you're doing a lot of rendering, you do a lot of tests and revisions and kind of change things and do another render. Well, with iRay now you have a couple of nice options with the GPU. One of them is that I can control in the hardware resources rollout for iRay how many CPUs or GPUs that I want the actual iRay renderer to use. So if I close this down, I can say when I'm doing an actual production renderer with iRay, I want all the resources in this box workstation to actually take advantage of the NVIDIA Tesla card as well as the Quadro 6000. And what I can also do, actually just to point it out, is enable motion blur, which is a new feature in iRay. But maybe more importantly for all our test rendering is that I can switch over to active shade here, and I just want to check and see that this is a smaller view, and I'm going to say that the active shade is only using half the cores in this box workstation and only one of the video GPU cards. So now when I do an active shade render, what's happening is we see that our image is doing that interactive iRay rendering. However, half of the horsepower of this workstation is still assigned to me, so I can manipulate my scene around and actually navigate around very freely using 6 of the 12 cores, as well as the Quadro 6000 is now set up for me, and the Tesla card is doing the iRay. rendering. So now with that view active, I can do things like adjust the exposure control, and I don't even need to do a render preview here. You can see that I can adjust the exposure control, and iRay is doing that update right there in the viewport. And I might say, let's kind of split the difference there and bring that back down. The Tesla card is taking care of all that interactive rendering for me, so there's a nice exposure. And let's maybe throttle that vignette effect back a little bit. And maybe do some mid-tone color correction here to kind of pop that up. Oh, I don't like that. Let's go back down. But you can see the advantage of working in a real-time rendering environment, and that iRay and Active Shade is a really nice way to work. And then once I'm happy with that result, I can dismiss our Active Shade viewport and then switch back to our production renderer. Once again, we're back to using all the resources of this workstation, and now when I go ahead and do a full render, you're going to see all of the CPUs and the GPUs in this machine kick in, and I've got this set up to do a 12-second render using, all these cores and GPUs, and you can see that, it knocks this thing out, and I get a really good representation. We've got soft shadows and all that kind of good stuff. Oops, and one more thing I forgot to mention. I'm going to interrupt that render. I'm going to unhide a couple of teapots here. I actually have a teapot just whizzing by right there, and it's going behind a glass tube. And I just wanted to do that last rendering to show you that the motion blur is actually a new feature. So you can see our teapot is actually going to start having samples for the motion blur, and it's actually being blurred behind the glass. So it's not a post-process blur, it's an actually in-camera motion blur that happens as a part of the iRay render. So lots of action going on with the iRay render. It's not just for stills anymore, kids. It's definitely worthwhile to check out for animation of all types. Speaking of animation, we've got the character animation toolkit here visible on our Bandy character, and I've just applied a layer of cat motion animation, which I can just go ahead and trash. To show you a new feature that's in 3ds Max 2013, I can just come up under the animation dialog and go to what's called the Autodesk Animation Store. And this gives me the ability to browse online and go out and look at all different types of animation motion. So with this selected, I could do a search, for example, of Samba, which I've done before, and I know that there's a free dance, but you can see that these are all priced at about like 30 bucks, 20 bucks. They're very inexpensive. And what I can do is with the character's pelvis selected, I'm going to say I want to see this Samba, and I want to preview this in my scene. So this is just going to take a second to parse over the internet, and I am live attached to the internet. This is just a warning that I don't have this character set up with spines and necks as keyframeable, but that's okay. And now you can see that I have that Samba dance directly in my scene, and I have preview in scene on. I can also do things like control the speed of this, so let's go faster, and maybe makes his arms a little bit narrower. That animation once again is being parsed over the internet, and now it's visible in my scene. So what you can do is get all different types of animation here, and once I'm happy with that, I can say buy the selected motion, and I could have my company or my individual self set up with a credit card. In this case, I'm going to say continue without logging in, just so you can see the sort of the purchase process. I have a $0 cart right here, but it's a free animation. And now when I say go ahead and check out, I'm actually purchasing this animation. And I can do that in a number of ways. I can say download this as an FBX file, so I could use this in another application such as Maya or Softimage or Motion Builder. Or I can say, in this case, write the keyframes to the scene. Now notice that this character's pelvis is selected and there are no keyframes in this scene right now. If I just say go ahead and download this, I'm actually making the transaction online, and now my keys are actually baked onto this character, and you can see that I've actually gone ahead and purchased that animation. And I can use this for as many different projects as I want now. To show you that this is still cat motion, I'll just kind of come over here into the motion panel, and you can see that this is actually a partnership with a company called Mixamo. So we have an animation layer called Mixamo, and then a new animation layer that I could optionally add is to say maybe our character's arms right here are too low. Well, I could just come to this new layer and add a adjustment layer of animation, if you will, and then just use traditional Max keyframing tools to actually just set different keyframes to kind of augment this animation. Motion capture might not be perfect for the physiological layout of your character that you buy, but you can buy a motion capture clip and get 90% of the way there, and then come through and actually just kind of clean that up. So the animation store is a really powerful way to add animation to your scenes, whether you're a seasoned veteran animator or if you just need to get something done and out the door by 5 o'clock. So lots of different ways of doing animation with the character animation toolkit. And you can also send this out to other applications such as Autodesk Maya and Motion Builder. So let's take a look at that. Here we are looking again at our Bandy character, and you can see that our cat rig has no animation on it. What I can do is just select the root node of our cat character and then come up and take advantage of the Suite's one-click feature and say send to Motion Builder. Now I could also notably send to Maya, which also in the 2013 release includes Human IK, which I'm about to show you. But in this case, I want to maybe do some motion capture and that kind of thing, and that's something very akin to using Motion Builder. So I'm going to say send this as a new scene over to Motion Builder, and I don't have to worry about any file formats or where the textures go or anything like that. And I'm going to very quickly just switch to the Motion Builder native camera. That's just a tip and trick that I like to work in the native camera. And you can see here that I'm connected to 3ds Max. Well, what I can do at this point is actually take advantage of the control rig that's inside of Motion Builder by just saying our character is the Bandy character, but the source of our animation is going to be the control rig. And I can do this with forward kinematics and inverse kinematics or just IK. And I'm going to say FK and IK. And now what I've got is a pre-characterized character in Motion Builder speak, and that you can see that we've got forward kinematics and inverse kinematics. Well, new to this release as well is the ability to work with full body IK, and I could do this in Motion Builder or Maya using a cat rig, and so you can see our character is using full body IK, and I could take advantage of hand keyframing using full body IK inside of Motion Builder or Maya. But what I'm also going to do is actually show you working with some motion capture. Now, I don't have a motion capture system hooked up to this machine, but I'm just going to merge in a pre-canned motion capture clip here called Punch. So here you can see our character, somebody ahead of time did some motion capture and brought it into Motion Builder. Now, instead of using the control rig to control our character, instead I'm going to say our Bandy character is going to be controlled by this motion capture called Punch. And here you can see we didn't have to do any form of retargeting, and our character is being driven by that animation. And now all I need to do is select a piece of our character, and with a single click, and I'll remind you we're connected to 3ds Max, I can just hit the update button, go back into 3ds Max, and lo and behold, our character has been animated within Motion Builder, and we have our punch animation that you can see here. Now, to take this one step further, I'll show you first that our character is still a cat rig, and that I could augment this with hand animation, as you saw earlier, with the animation store. So this is just a way that you can get cat rigs to Motion Builder or Maya to do your animation if you're more comfortable there, and then actually come back inside of 3ds Max to do different forms of animation. So what I've got here is our character that's a little bit mad at something, and I'm just going to go ahead and unhide everything in our scene here. And there's a little bit of a machine here that he's got, sort of the thumbtack death machine. That's what this is called. If you go over here, you can see that he's very upset with something, but nothing's happening when he actually goes ahead and throws his punch. Well, what I'm going to do is actually show you the Mass Effects feature set inside of 3ds Max. And if I just right-click up here and say I want to see the Mass Effects toolbar, what I can do is actually evoke lots of different types of attributes for these objects. Now I have the machine selected here, and what I could do is say that this machine is actually dynamic rigid bodies. And if I just go ahead and hit play on this now, you're going to see the machine kind of just blow apart. Well, that's not what we're after. What we want to do is actually edit all of these features or all these objects in mass and say that these are going to actually start in sleep mode. And what that means is that when I hit play, our physics engine is actually running right now, and the punch animation is sort of driving the timing of this thing breaking apart. And now that we're happy with that, I could actually say, let's go back through into our Mass Effects tools, let's bake this animation out, and very quickly, in fact faster than real time, you can see that we did a motion capture clip in Motion Builder, we applied it to our character, and then we used the Mass Effects physics engine to actually cook that into our scene. So now, using two different systems, we have very dynamic and very active animation. And I'll just remind you, none of this was hand keyframed. So this is a completely procedural animation using motion capture and the physics engine known as Mass Effects. So lots of good stuff happening inside of 3ds Max around animation as well.
Hey everybody, my name is Lee Fraser, and I'm a Senior Solutions Specialist for Autodesk. Today I'm going to walk you through some of the new features found inside the latest version of Maya 2013. We've made quite a large number of improvements, as you might have imagined, for 2013. These are just a few of the highlights. We've added hair to the nucleus family of dynamic objects. So hair now works with nucleus and automatically reacts and works with nCloth as well as nParticles. We've made some enhancements to Viewport 2.0. We've got GPU caching as well as alembic point caching. There's a new node editor that you might have seen. Bullet physics, heat map skinning, which is a great new way of skinning your characters. Tracks clip matching, as well as atom animation transfer. This makes it really easy to transfer animation in and out of your scenes and repurpose it. We've added file referencing workflows. You can now access the references in your scene through the outliner, which makes it really handy. Graph editor enhancements as well as enhancements to HIK. We're going to start off by taking a look at the enhancements to Viewport 2.0. As you can see from the list, we've done quite a bit of work on Viewport 2.0. We now support things like ghosting, ramp shaders and layered shaders, as well as area lights. We also support image planes and fluids. Lots of other things that you can see there that are really useful to be able to see in Viewport 2.0. So let's take a look in the interface here, and you can see that we've got our scene up, and you can see the nice depth of field on our scene. We're looking at the character here. We've also got an expression driving that depth of field, so as I pull away, that depth of field sort of increases to encompass the other things in my scene, so that sort of widens that depth of field. I'm actually going to turn off depth of field for this next example. If I set the door here or select the door, you can see it's animated to be opened and closed. And one of the things that we now support is ghosting. So I'm just going to ghost this selected object. And you can see over here to the right, it'll flag this object under the object display and give me control over how that looks. You can see right away I get those ghosted instances of that object. Now it's a little bit easier to see if we go into wireframe on shaded, and then we can start to see those wireframe colors inside the ghosting display options. So over in the attribute editor, I can choose either the global prefs or I can choose just individual keyframes. I'll go back to the global prefs. I think that's going to work pretty well for me in this case. And you can see as I scrub through this, you can see that the lead-in frames are sort of a pink color and the trailing ones are blue, and I can change that. I can just click on my swatch here, and maybe I want frames that are leading in to be a little hotter and the ones as they exit to be just a little bit cooler, so I can maybe make those white or maybe even more intense blue, and you can see the results right away. Another thing that we can do is make it more transparent, so I can sort of start to fade that off as it peels away from the door and see that update right in Viewport 2.0. I'm going to go ahead and turn ghosting off by checking off the checkbox under the attribute editor under ghosting information. I could also go over to the animate menu and unghost all or unghost selected, but for now that'll work for me, and I'll turn off wireframe on shaded. So from here we can take a look at another really nice thing I think in Viewport 2.0 that is probably one of the highlights, and that's the inclusion of the ramp shader. To look at our ramp shader in action in Viewport 2.0, I'm going to build up an effect inside the new node editor. The new node editor allows you to see and make connections right from the nodes themselves, similar to sort of a combination of the connection editor and the hypershade. I can select different nodes and expand their channels so I can see the different channels that are available to be connected. I can also collapse that and see just the connected channels, and it works independently of each other too, so I can collapse individual nodes. I can change their swatch size and do different things that really make it a really nice freeform layout. So another thing I really like about it is the ability to create nodes directly in the node editor by hitting just the tab key. So in this case we're going to start off with a layered shader, and I typed in a layered. Let's type in just layered, and using the arrow key I can just select the one that I want and hit enter, and it's that simple. So let's go ahead and take that guy, and we'll also create a ramp shader because that's going to be the basis of our effect. The ramp shader is great for creating all kind of glancing angle effects and basing the color and the transparency and specular color based on light angle, facing angle, all kinds of different information. It really makes it a great shader. I'm going to go ahead and hit tab one more time. Actually, let's go ahead and use an existing environment ball. I'll drag that down into my node editor, and we'll just start making those connections. I'm going to select both of these guys and expand their connections out, and just like I mentioned before, if I drag the channel away, I can hover over any one of these channels and I can see immediately based on the highlighted selection there what I have available to me to connect. So I'm just going to drag and drop that into the reflected color. We'll collapse those guys back down, and we'll just drag them into our layered shader just like that. Just take that guy into the color, drag the ramp shader in there, and right away let's actually grab the geometry assigned to this blend, and we'll just reassign this Lambert shader. So you can see right away I get this really great glossy effect on the car. It is based on not only the ramp shader but layered on top of this blend, so I get this clear coat effect right inside the viewport. So that is the ramp shader and its ability to be displayed inside viewport 2.0 along with the layered shader. Another area that we've enhanced greatly in 2013 is the ability to work with custom animation rigs using HIK and retargeting animation from motion capture or another source directly to those rigs. Let's take a look at how that works. To start working with our character using a custom rig, the first thing we need to do as it relates to HIK is define our character, and we do that through our joints. Now in this case, this character does have a custom control and set of controls, and they're pretty standard. We've got FK, IK on her feet. We've got some FK joints and some controls for her spine, and some controls for her head. One thing you'll notice is that the skin for her shorts is not bound into the skeleton, so we can talk about that really quickly. We have a new smooth bind method inside 2013, and it allows us to avoid some of the problems that you might get with traditional binding as it relates to these points that kind of cross over between the different sides of the character. So I'm just going to select the shorts, go into the smooth bind method, and select heat map as the bind method, and when I click on bind skin, you'll notice that I get a really nice bind by default without any extra work, and that's going to save people a lot of time, I think, especially in complex skinning situations. Now I mentioned the skeleton and the character that we want to work with, so I'm just going to go over here and click the define skeleton button, and this is really easy, and the workflow is very similar to what we've had in the past. We just have to double click on the control in our character controls window and then select the corresponding joint inside of Maya. Now you can see it also, since I have mirroring turned on, it picks up the joint on the opposite side, and this makes it really fast and easy to define your character. In this case, I'm going to go and import a skeleton definition that I've already created, and also take a look at the fact that we can of course import bipeds as well as cat rigs inside of Maya. Go ahead and click on that, and you can see that my rig is set up. There's a couple of different warnings that inside the character controls with regards to how the character is positioned, but I know this character is okay, so I can go ahead and lock the character off, and I'm set to go. The next thing I want to do is just define a custom mapping between my character's control rig and an HIK rig. So that's pretty easy to do. Very similar workflow. I select my control and then select the control inside the character controls window, and right mouse button click and just assign that. It's really smart. I can work with any manner of types of joints. So in this case, I can go in and select the control for her back, and you can see that it automatically knows that it's an FK control, whereas the control for the hand is FK as well as translation for IK. So again, just like the other control or the other definition, I can go in and load up my mapping of my control rig to my character, and once that's done, you can see that I get all of the different joints that correspond. There's the head. I can move that. I can select the foot and go in and rotate and move that around, and I'm all set to go. So what can we do with this? Well, the best thing about this is I can retarget animation immediately onto my custom rig. I'm going to go ahead and bring in some motion capture. One of the nice things that we've done inside of 2013 is going ahead and characterize all of the different motion capture inside the library, so that saves a little bit of extra work. So you can see right now I've got my motion capture in the scene, and as I navigate around, you can see that the joint hierarchies are a little bit different in size, but that doesn't matter because we can use that retargeting information right on top of our character. I'm just going to go up to the character controls, and I'm going to drive this, instead of the source as none, I'm going to use the mocap example. And you'll see right away our character behaves and moves exactly as you would expect, and we can continue working using all of the tools inside of Maya, or we can continue to refine this using the tools inside of HIK. For instance, you can see that her hands pass to the floor just a little bit. We might want to control that. So let's take a look at how we can use the standard HIK tools to drive how this character behaves. Let's go ahead and grab her left hand here, and if I take my IK blend translate, you can see that I can try to achieve the translation position instead of just that direct rotation that's used by default. And if we reach past a certain point, we can use the IK pull that allows the character to offset that position and move down into a position that we might want her in, and continue the animation. Now in this case, you also see that her hands are passing through the floor, so let's go ahead and correct that. I'm going to go into the rig controls itself, and I'm going to go into edit definition. I'm just going to edit the properties of this. Now in this case, we've got floor contacts, And if we open that up, we can look at the hands. And in this case, I'm just going to turn it on, and you'll see our hands immediately pop up. Now, we've also, of course, got offsets for that, so we can bring that up just a little bit and sort of make some decisions based on that, or we can animate any of these values off and on as we see fit. So that is the way we are using now custom rigs in association with Human IK inside of Maya 2013. We're going to switch gears now and go from rigging and talk a little bit about Maya 2013 dynamics. We've got nHair, which is hair that is now a proper citizen within the nucleus family of dynamic objects. So nHair or hair now reacts to the nCloth objects as well as nParticle objects without any extra work. They just interact with each other, as well as interact with the different fields and constraints that are a part of nucleus. You can also see some of the other features there, particle post-cache ramp evaluation. We'll take a quick look at that, as well as caching improvements, as well as the ability to see fluids within Viewport 2.0. We're going to switch gears now and go from rigging and talk a little bit about Maya 2013 dynamics. We've got nHair, which is hair that is now a proper citizen within the nucleus family of dynamic objects. So nHair or hair now reacts to the nCloth objects as well as nParticle objects without any extra work. They just interact with each other, as well as interact with the different fields and constraints that are a part of nucleus. You can also see some of the other features there, particle post-cache ramp evaluation. We'll take a quick look at that, as well as caching improvements, as well as the ability to see fluids within Viewport 2.0. The new powerful option inside nParticles is a post-cache ramp evaluation, and essentially that's a mouthful that indicates that you can go back and change attributes after a cache has been created. So if I scroll down to my cache section within my particle system, all I have to do is click on post-cache ramp evaluation. I have the choice of being able to pick some different options with regards to what I'm caching, but in this case, once I'm done, I'm just going to go in and go to my nCache and create a new cache. In this case, I'm just going to create one file. We'll do 200 frames and hit go. My caches this out in a pretty hasty manner, and once it's done, it gives me back control. Now, typically, if you created a cache, this would be it. You'd either, if you wanted to make a change, you'd have to go back and change the cache or create a new cache. And in this case, we now have control over things that are driven by these ramp widgets. So in this case, I want to take my radius scale input, for example, and drive this with a randomized ID and just change that based on this ramp widget. So you can see I get interactive feedback. I can even go back and change the overall size of these and drive the initial ones down and basically make some creative decisions after that cache has been created. We can even go into the shading attributes and change something like, in this case, the red value. Maybe we want to make this a little more blue or purple, and base that on something like randomized age or randomized ID or normalized age, all of the different values that you're used to using to create those particle systems. So this is a really new cool feature inside the nParticles in Maya 2013. Working with nHair inside of Maya 2013 is very similar to working with the classic hair that we've had in the past. All we have to do is select a piece of geometry that we want hair to grow from and click on the Create Hair menu item, or in this case I've got it up on my shelf. From there, all we have to do is hit play, and the hair reacts appropriately, except in this case it's tied to the nucleus engine, which allows us to work with nCloth and nParticles. So there's a couple of other great things about the nHair shape that gives us some capability that we haven't had in the past. First off, let's make this look a little bit better. We'll increase the clump width. This is something that we've had in the past, of course. The control of this is very similar. I'm going to take the selected value and overdrive this to something like 4, and you can see right away how quick and easy it is to get some extra volume in the hair. But what really makes a difference is now we have self-collision for these hairs. And when I click on that, you'll see that it sort of tries to puff up, and based on that pretty extreme value I set in the clump width scale, it sort of tries to separate itself from each other, and it'll rest back the way you would expect. But now we can go back and sort of dial this value back in a little more appropriately. Of course, we can set presets on all of these. I've already got one that will mimic a little bit more the color and style that we've got on the existing texture mapped hair on the character's head. And this allows us to continue working. So let's go ahead and set up the collision with the character itself. It's very simple. All we have to do is turn the character into a passive collider. So now that we have that set up, we can hit play. Let's bump up the stickiness factor on the geometry, and as it comes into contact with the back, you can see that we get a couple of straggler hairs that get stuck to the back, that get stuck, and we can also turn stickiness up on the hair. But as I turn down that stickiness value, it relaxes and drifts away from the body the way you would expect. So again, it's so much easier to get the reaction and the motion and the shape of the hair than we have in the past. We can turn the character's head, of course, and get it to react the way you would expect. It drifts and drapes over the geometry appropriately. And you can see that we get some really great results being able to drive the collisions without any extra work. So the feedback that we get is really tremendous. So I'm going to go ahead and not only set the stance pose back, but rewind to frame 1 so we get a reset on our simulation. And from here, I want to start talking a little bit about how else we can control the hair. So I'm going to go ahead and select the endpoints on the hair, and I'm going to drive those with a translation constraint or a transform constraint. This is something that we've had in the past, and when I hit play, you can see now that it just sort of drifts and hangs down there. We can twist the hair in this manner. We can move it around and sort of position it wherever we want. But what I want to do is interact with it with some particles. So I'm just going to create a particle emitter. I'm going to change that guy to a volume emitter and maybe scale it up just a little bit. And then I'm going to go back and select my dynamic constraint, because the dynamic constraint allows us to show off the interaction with the particles. So let's go ahead and hit play. And as the particles come in contact, you can see that they sort of roll off each of those hairs. As it comes in contact, they sort of roll down, and as they work their way in between the individual hairs, you can see that it sort of falls through the way you'd expect real hair to do. And in this case, what we want to do is cause it to break the constraint values here. So as I sort of start to turn this glue strength down, based on the mass, you'll see those hairs start to break away. And the particles drift along for the ride, and they sort of break that constraint. So we can play around with those values a little bit. It works alongside the other properties for the particles that you would expect. So we can go up and select the particle emitter, go to the nParticle shape. We can bump up, say, the particle size just a little bit, and then maybe go into the dynamic properties and turn up the mass. So let's bump that way up. We'll make it really heavy. And then under the collisions, we're going to turn the stickiness up just a little bit, just to have a little fun. So we'll go out, grab that transform constraint one more time. And as we start to play with that glue value, you can see that those guys really just kind of pop that transform constraint, the glue strength, just pop it right off. So that is a really cool way of being able to control nHair. So nHair, of course, is not only good for hair, but all kinds of different dynamic objects. You can create rope bridges and clotheslines and any kind of thing that has sort of some flexibility and that you want to interact with other dynamic objects using Nucleus, whether it's nHair or nParticles and nCloth. So that is a look at some of the new dynamics features in Maya 2013. Last but not least, let's take a look at some of the new animation capabilities inside Maya 2013. You can see that we've got the ability now to convert cat to human IK rigs. We can do live character streaming from Motion Builder to Maya if you're using one of the suites. We've got a new file format called Atom. This allows you to transfer animation back and forth, including constraints, animation layers, and set-driven keys between files and rigs. We've got some new improvements to tracks. We can now use a cool new retiming tool, not just in Maya, but inside of Max, Softimage, as well as Motion Builder, so the retiming tool is consistent throughout those graph editors. We've got a stepped tangent preview, as well as camera sequencer updates and improved baking options. So let's see how the Atom file transfer works. The Atom file format, or animation transfer object model, inside of Maya 2013 allows you to accurately set what animation you want to reuse and how you import and export it into your Maya scene. Let's take a look at how it works. In this case, I've got a character that's driven by her control rig, and you can see all of the different controls that are set up for this particular character. If I want to export this animation out, all I have to do is go to my animation menus and go down to the Atom file menu, and in this case what I'm going to do is create an Atom template. The template will allow me to dictate what I want to use as the import and export locations for my character. Now in this case you can see I also have this option to create a view. So if I wanted to pick just the arms or a different part of the character, I could create a view for that particular section of the character within my template. In this case I'm just going to create one for the overall character. You can see in this case I can go out and select girl template and overwrite that one. We'll apply that. And if we wanted to create a view, we can either do that here by selecting, say, the neck and the head, and we'll just call this head. And it's going to ask me to overwrite that one more time. I'll do that. And then we want to select the arms and hands, and we'll create a view for the arms. And we'll do that one more time. So that writes it into that template, those different views. From here, all I have to do is make a couple of changes to my scene, because in this case, we're going to show how the Atom file format can work with animation layers. So in this case, we're just going to go over here and we'll go to our animation layers tab. We'll select a new animation layer, and I'll set a keyframe at that point. We'll just have this girl lower down. She's going to duck underneath something here right as she walks around the corner. Set a keyframe there, and then have her raise back up, and set a keyframe there. So you can see now that she sort of ducks underneath whatever she's walking under, and she'll move forward. So this actually gets transferred with the Atom file format. So let's go ahead and transfer that animation to another scene. I'm going to select one of the controls on the character, and we'll just go to Export Animation from the Atom file menu. And I'm going to pick my Atom file here. I'm just going to go out and we'll say this is the girl export. We'll overwrite the one that we've got. Notice I've got the option to include constraints and set-driven keys as well as the animation layers, which we're going to look at here. In this case, I'm going to use the template file that we looked at earlier. We'll go ahead and read that in, make sure it's the right one. And notice that I have the option to include my views as the export, or in this case, I'm going to also use the view for the import. So in this case, I can use the view for import or export. I'm going to include everything in this case and then dictate what I want to bring in on the character on the other side. We'll use the time range as all and hit apply. It's that easy. Now let's open up the other file. Okay, here's our character. As I scrub through the timeline, you can see there's no animation that's been applied to her. I'm going to select the sort of base hip control and go to my Atom menu and just import the animation. I've got similar controls here on the import as I do on the export. I'm going to import this based on the template. You can see that all we have to do is browse for the template file. And in this case, we're going to match the method using the string, which is the name of the different nodes. We could also use hierarchy or a map file. In this case, we're going to use the template that we defined earlier, and we're just going to use, in this case, we'll start off with the arms view. And so in this case, all I have to do is hit apply, and you can see right away I've applied just the animation to the arms of the character. Of course, it's just as easy to add the animation in for the head, and now you can see I've got animation on the arms as well as the head, and it's just that simple to apply that to the base character as well. Notice that on the import for the full character, I get the animation from the animation layer that I've got over here to the side, and I still have control over the weights of that. So that's a quick look at the Atom file format inside of Maya. It's going to give users a lot more flexibility in terms of reusing animation inside of Maya 2013. I wanted to finish off by mentioning a few of the other improvements that we've made to Maya 2013. Of course, we've also made improvements in terms of interoperability in the Entertainment Creation Suite through one-click. But you can see here that we've got GPU caching now that's based on Alembic. We've got interoperability with Max, as well as the capability of editing your attribute editor. We're doing that now through the use of a bonus tool. We'll get to that in just a second, but we've also added some capabilities to Maya Composite and Match Mover. As you can see there, we've got QuickTime support as well as Python scripting in Match Mover. So the bonus tools, go check these out. It's a free download on the area. I mentioned the Attribute Editor Template Builder. This just allows you to create custom attribute editors inside of Maya. And then you can see some fixes that have gone into 2013 bonus tools as well. So definitely check that out.
Well, with that, on behalf of Lee Fraser and myself, I'd like to thank you for checking out the Autodesk Media and Entertainment Creation Suite Part 1 webinar. We hope that you come around for Part 2, which is going to include some more information regarding the other products, such as Motion Builder, Softimage, as well as Sketchbook Pro. We'd also like to encourage you to check out the area website where you can download the Ultimate Suite as well as our point products, and you can have 30-day trials of every single one of these. So again, on behalf of Lee Fraser, this is Gary Davis, and we'd like to thank you for coming by today.